It's an honor to be here with you today, and pray for me. My voice, I think I said it yesterday, but my grandson handed me a head cold a couple weeks ago. I don't know if anybody's experienced that, but my voice has just been strained. So God's going to grace me to deliver this message this morning, and I want to jump right into it and encourage you. You can, if you're looking along your Bible on a digital device or on your Bible, it's 2 Samuel chapter 6. It's a very, very familiar passage, especially for people in the prayer movement or people that have a deep respect and a deep love and admiration for the story of David. We're going to be looking at David, and the title of the message I'm sharing with you is called "The Priesthood is Changing." The priesthood is changing. And this is a message that the Lord has given me to carry to unique places around the United States that I believe God is beginning to raise up in a very unique fashion for what He has on the horizon for the next several years and the next move of God. And so I'm going to share this message with you this morning. 26 years ago, my wife and I pulled into small little town of Kalamazoo from Grand Rapids. Little red trailer that we affectionately named Tabernacle 1 because it was a portable church. And as I said yesterday, we rented out a cafeteria that was called the Devil's Den. And we set up 70 wobbly little blue chairs and had an overhead projector, a bluegrass worship leader. And I was 25 years old, had no people, no money, no experience, nothing. But what we did have is we had a mandate from the Lord. The Lord called us to move to this city to establish a praying and a worshiping church and to hold fast to that call. And over the last 26 years, God has been so faithful and so steadfast in any of the growth and any of the impact and any of the influence that God has given to us at Radiant Church. Is not due to my brilliance. It's not due to location. It's not even due to strategy. It really is due to the goodness and the sovereignty of God and His mercy. And He's used us along the way, and we really do stand back in awe at what He has done. But I will say that there is no matter what God has called you to, no matter what role you serve in the body of Christ, whatever it is that God has called you to serve Him, there's a component of it where we're called to hold fast to that and to not let go of it, and to consistently keep Jesus out in front of us, the author and the finisher of our faith, setting our eyes on Jesus. And you know, that should go without saying, but yet it is very difficult at times to do in ministry. So many times we're tempted to get our eyes on other things. And so this message this morning, really, if you just had to boil it down, it just is simply the call of Jesus to His church to keep our eyes on Him. So look with me here at 2 Samuel chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. This is the story of David bringing the ark into the city of Jerusalem. It says, David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and he went with all the people who were with him to Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a new cart, and they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David, but David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all of his household. And it was told to King David, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him, because the ark of God. And so David went and he brought the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and fatted animals. And David danced before the Lord with all of his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all of the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. I want to make a statement about where I believe the Western American church is at the current hour in which we are in. And I want you to keep this in mind, that I am a church person. I'm a local church person. I'm a pastor, a church planter. I love the Church of Jesus. And the statement I'm going to make is not a statement of condemnation against the bride of Christ as much as it is about the system and the structure that has adorned the bride of Christ in our North American Western context. And so with that said, here's the statement I want to make. The consumer model of Christianity has been tried and found wanting. And consumer Christianity is officially dead. See, the condition of the Western American church right now, what has taken place over the last couple of years that has led us to this cultural prophetic moment that we find ourselves in. It's a moment where we're all standing back and trying to put our finger on exactly what it is that we feel and what we sense and what we know, but we don't have words for. What has brought us to this place is, as I said yesterday, the pressure of the last couple of years has exposed our weaknesses. It's exposed the weaknesses, and we're being confronted with the weakness of men, methodologies, and models. We're being confronted with the weakness of men, that men are not superheroes no matter what Marvel tells us. We're being confronted with the weakness of our methodology that works in a perfect environment but doesn't work in necessarily a post-Christian or a typically persecuting or ostracizing culture. And we're being confronted with the models that we shape to build churches based on a consumer mindset and not on a consumed lifestyle. COVID-19 did not cause all this. Let's be real about it. It didn't cause it, but what it did was it revealed it. And I like to say it this way, is COVID-19 unmasked the weaknesses of the consumer model in our churches. Now, I'm not talking about that we should be unfriendly, that we shouldn't have our churches designed to welcome people in, to help identify where they're at. I'm not talking about the church just, being a free-for-all and not being aware of the communities that we're in. And I'm definitely not talking about churches who are unconcerned about reaching the lost, but I am talking about models and methodologies within the church where the presence of God has been placed in a secondary and third role because the other things have taken the front seat. And in order for us to recognize that, we have to think about the fact that a recent Barna poll was taken not too long ago that said that 38% of pastors in the year 2021 were considering quitting. It's like, how is it that men and women who are called by God, who have encountered the Lord, who have deep, deep history with Jesus, who've given their lives to prepare to serve him with the rest of their lives in ministry, can go through a period of time that hurts so badly, that confronts them with so many challenges, that they actually begin to think about, there's got to be an alternative lifestyle that I can step into that's less painful than the joy of serving Jesus. That ought to reveal something to us. It ought to reveal to us that not that something's wrong with God or the call of God in our life, but there's something wrong with how we're doing it. You see, we have moral failures of high-profile leaders, doctrinal deconstruction that's happening all around us. Got an entire generation that's getting their theological underpinnings from TikTok. We've got denominations splintering in half over issues of sexuality and gender identity that the church has long established for 2,000 years. But finally, in a Western American 21st century culture, we figured out how Jesus and the church has been wrong all this time. We've become infected by a political spirit where we're more passionate about the politics in America than we are about the principles of the kingdom of Jesus. And what we've begun to experience is a great polarization within not just our nation, but within the church. All of this, what this speaks to me as a leader, is that there has to be a change. There has to be a change in the order of things within the church in order for us to regain our equilibrium. And I believe that that's what God is doing graciously and mercifully right now in the period of time that we're in. And I believe the period of time that we are in right now is very, very similar to the period of time that we just read about where David had it in his heart to go and to find the ark and to bring it back into the center of culture. I believe we're at this very unique time. You see, the history of the ark is the ark was obviously it was built by Moses, put in the tabernacle of Moses, led them in their wandering in the wilderness and even into the promised land. And then it was established under the tabernacle in the care of the priesthood. But the ark, some years earlier than this account, had been captured by the Philistines. You see, they thought, well, we're going out to battle against our enemies, so hey, let's go get the ark. Let's bring the ark because, that's our secret weapon. And so they brought the priests and the ark out and they went up against the Philistines. And because God was not going to be useful to them, he allowed himself to be captured, and the Philistines captured the ark, and they thought, look, we've got their God. And you know the story, they put it in their temple, and idols begin to fall down, people begin to get sick. I mean, just everything goes wrong, and they had this brilliant idea. They said, let's get rid of the ark, and let's send it back. And so they sent it back over the border between Philistia and Israel. And when they sent it back into Israel, instead of restoring the ark back to where it needed to be, they abandoned the ark. They abandoned the presence of God. 1 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 3 reveals a little bit more of David's heart about this issue. He says, let us bring again the Lord, or the ark of the Lord our God, for we did not seek him in the days of Saul. So you had a whole leadership era under King Saul where the ark of God, which represents the presence of God, was not consulted at all. It was left in the outskirts of Israel. It was like, hey, we don't want to bring it back to the center. We're content with having it out in the margins. We're content with its back over the border, but we're not going to bring it back and put it at the center of everything that we do until there came a leader named David. A leader that God says is a man after my own heart. God gave Israel a king because they wanted a king. He said, you want a king? You've rejected me as your king, so I'll give you a king. And the king that God gave Israel was a king that was a mere reflection of their corrupted heart. He said, I'm going to give you a king, so every time you see him and his actions and his insecurity and his self-absorption, it's going to be a mere reflection of how I see you in your corrupted state. But then when Saul actually did fail and did expose his insecurity and would not obey God, God says, now I'm going to give you a king that doesn't just reflect your heart. I'm going to give you my choice of a king who reflects my heart. So every time you see David, you're going to see who I am. You're going to see what I'm passionate about. And God identified David long before anybody else identified David. David was this king who started as a shepherd, taking care of his father's sheep and touching the heart of God with his songs, but being raised up as a warrior and leadership being developed on the inside of him. We can piece little pieces back together about who David was. Psalm 51 says, "In sin was I conceived." Some theologians have, considered the option that it was maybe that David was the child of an immoral relationship between Jesse, and that's why Jesse didn't remember him and didn't call for him when he called for the other sons. And it may or may not be the case, but what we do know is that he was not his dad's favorite. But while he was out in the wilderness, he was digging deep into the soil of a relationship with God. And something about who David was longed to touch the heart of God, was happy to live for an audience of one, and he searched out the deep emotions of God's heart. And so when God sends Samuel into Jesse's neighborhood and he says, "You're going to go to the house of Jesse and you're going to appoint a new king," he says, "Don't look at the outward appearance. I look at the heart." Pours the oil on top of David's head, and then David goes into the wilderness testing, serving under Saul, misunderstanding, and years and years and years. So if anybody ever thinks, "Hey, if I'm called by God, life should be easy," just look at David. Because if you're called by God, you probably have some caves you're going to hide out in. You probably have some wildernesses you're going to go through, because what that does is it brings the leadership that God wants to develop in you to the surface. But here's what is beautiful about David. When David finally does come into power, and he really does take the throne over all of Judah and all of Israel, when Israel, the northern tribes, come and say, "Hey, we want you to come and rule over us," David immediately says, "Let's go get Jerusalem." Nobody had been able to get Jerusalem to this point. So he goes and he conquers Jerusalem. It's the high watermark of David's leadership. It's the greatest day of his life. This is like Super Bowl Sunday, and he's won the Super Bowl. I would not know what that feeling is like, because I'm a Detroit Lions fan, and we haven't won anything in decades. But I got to imagine if I was a Kansas City Chiefs fan, which I know there's none in this room, that it's got to feel pretty good. Imagine being David, and you've defeated your enemies. You're at the high watermark of your life. All of your dreams, all of the things that God has spoken over you have finally come true in one day. And the first thing that comes out of the heart of David, the first priority of his rule and of his reign, is he says, "Let's go get the ark." So you can tell a lot about somebody, not just by what they do at the lowest point of their life, but more often what you see them do at the highest level of their success. An NBA player signs a huge contract, and the first thing he does is he says, "I'm going to buy my mom a house." The mom who struggled my whole life to put food on the table, worked 2 jobs so I could have basketball shoes. I'm going to go and I'm going to buy my mom a house. I'm going to go buy my dad a car. You see that come out of them. It's like they've been thinking about it, meditating on it, and it's not about them. David's first reaction was, now that I've come to power, now that Jerusalem, the city of the great king, is established, let's go get the ark and let's bring him back. And so he gathers all of Israel, the very ark that Saul had neglected. And he says, we're going to go and get the ark. And the first time he does it, they put it on a cart just like the Philistines did. And you know the story, it failed. Uzzah dies. And David gets mad at God. They park it in Obed-Edom's house in his garage, and it's like, hey, Obed-Edom's not even a Jew. He's a Gittite, and he's like, hey, would you take care of the ark till we figure out what to do with it? And over the course of the 3 months, he hears that, Obed-Edom wins the Powerball, $1 billion lottery, and his hair is starting to grow back, and his marriage is getting better. His kids are getting straight A's. His car is getting 100 miles per gallon mileage, and his retirement portfolio is exploding. And he's like, what in the world's going on? God's good to him. And it begins to stir his heart again, and he says, let's go, let's do this again, but let's do it right. And so they go back, and I want you to think about this scene. It's a several mile journey to Jerusalem that they're going to go. And David says, we're going to do it right this time. We're not going to put it on carts, because the ark of God was meant to be carried on the shoulders of men and not on the carts that men construct. God's presence will not be carried in systems. It has to be carried by men. God doesn't anoint methods. God anoints men. God doesn't anoint strategies. God anoints men. And so God will not be handled. That's why he struck Uzzah. God doesn't need your help, excuse me. And so now he says we're going to do it right, and he puts it on the poles. He goes back and he consults the scriptures, and we've got to do this the way that God said it. And they begin to walk it, and every 6 steps, they offer a bull or an oxen. 6 is the number of man. It was as if David is saying, we've come to the end of man's best attempts. Now we need blood. And then we're going to take 6 more steps with the presence of God. And then we're going to shed more blood. That was a bloody journey from Obed-Edom's house. And everything was going as planned. Everybody expected this. Except they didn't expect David, the king, to be wearing an ephod, leading the way instead of following the way, because David recognized that there was only one king in this procession, and it was not him. And as they began to carry the ark back, they came to an intersection. They came to an intersection. And if they were going to restore the ark back to the tabernacle of Moses, they needed to turn left. And that's, I believe, where everybody expected David to take it. Okay, we're restoring the ark back to the tabernacle, the outer courts, the inner courts, and the Holy of Holies, back to the priesthood, so that the glory of God can return to Israel. And they all expected it, but when they got to this intersection, that if they turn left, they go back to Gibeon, where the tabernacle of Moses is. But if they turn right, they go to Jerusalem. And David, leading the way with the linen ephod that is reserved for priests, takes a sharp right turn and begins to lead them towards Zion, to a tent that he had established right next to his home as king. And I believe everything in the heavens and everything in the earth realms shifted and shook in that particular moment. Because as he came to this intersection, what he was saying by his turn was, God, I'm not content to put you back the way things were. I want you near me. I want you at the center. I don't want my throne on Zion. I want your throne on Zion. And David, you know the story. He appoints the Levites, 4,000 of them, 24 hours, 7 days a week, to minister to the Lord. And he puts the ark in the center of the tabernacle. And I believe that this all comes down to a premeditated character and a premeditated intent that David had in his heart for years and years and years. God, if you ever fulfill the promises and the prophecies over my life, I'm going to bring you to the center. I'm going to bring you to the center of everything that I do. And here's why I believe that this story of David is a prophetic type of the hour in which the church is at right now. The church in the West in particular. It's because I believe as the church, we are standing at that intersection. We are standing at that intersection. And we can decide whether we want to return back to Gibeon and we want to put the ark back in, the presence back in the way that it has always been, or whether there's going to be a new thing where we're going to bring him back to the center. We're not going to keep him out in the margins. We're going to bring him to the center. As I said to you, I'm a local church guy. And so for years and years and years, I have watched and appreciated much of what God did in the House of Prayer movement. But it always felt like, I think Billy might have said it on day one, it's like church and House of Prayer don't always play nice together. And there's a little difference of culture and language and bridal paradigms. And nobody ever taught me that stuff. I've learned to appreciate it over the years, but it wasn't my language. And I'm a local church guy that was building a church from the ground up. And I began to ask the Lord years and years and years ago about why is there this distinction between the House of Prayer movement and the local church movement. And the Lord showed me that if you go back into the story of the ark, Abinadab was the one that hosted the Ark of the Covenant for 20 years during the reign of Saul when the ark was not wanted and not consulted. And I believe that much of the reason why God raised up the house of prayer movement was not out of rebellion. It was because there was an Abinadab anointing upon a whole group of people who said, if God's presence is not wanted in the local church, then I'll raise up Abinadab and his sons who will caretake it until I raise up a Davidic leadership that is ready to go and receive the ark and bring it back into the center once again. And I think now we're standing at that intersection, and here's what the intersection is an invitation for. The invitation that God is giving is, can I find and am I raising up a group of Davidic-hearted leaders, and not just pastors, but worship leaders and people that serve in the local church and senior pastors and leaders of movements who have it in their heart that Psalm 132 vow that David had resonating on the inside of him for decades before he ever had the opportunity, that says, I want to bring the presence of God and to make the resting place of God the priority of my life. I believe that the heart has two heart conditions that we can grab a hold of. One is we can become content with status quo, or we can contend for more. That's the difference. A.W. Tozer a long time ago said this. He said, I want the presence of God himself, or I don't want anything at all to do with religion. I want all that God has, or I don't want any of it. Any all or nothing people in this room? I mean, it's like, God, I want all that you have. You know, I encountered God in a little Assembly of God church. I was 12 years old. My grandparents were holiness Pentecostal people. My grandparents were the single most influential people in my life. They taught me to love Jesus, taught me to love the Bible. And they went to church. And when you went to Pentecostal Holiness Church, it was like 3-hour plus services. It was like Jeremiah Johnson and Corey Russell all the time. I mean, 11 o'clock services were nothing new. And my grandparents, I mean, they were all in. My grandmother played the piano. My grandfather led worship. My Aunt Jeanette played the Hammond B3 organ. She had a big, beehive haircut that twitched like a shadow on the wall when the Holy Ghost came in the room. And I grew up ducking under pews because Tuppy Mudge, who was 6'8", would start going, whoa, the Holy Ghost is here. And I'm like, ghosts, I'm out. And I'd like duck under the... And we went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night. There wasn't any of this Sunday morning only. It was Sunday morning, Sunday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. We went to church. And on August 11th, 1983, my grandfather said, come on, we're going to church. I said, I think I'm going to stay home. And he said, no, you're not. You're coming to church. And 17 people in that church service. And I was by 4 decades the youngest. I was 12 years old. And I remember sitting in that church service, drawing on the inside of hymnals. I will tell you, there was nothing attractional about that service. Nothing. The message was probably great, but not memorable for me. It didn't impact me. There wasn't like light show worship. There wasn't any of that kind of stuff. And at the end of the service, the pastor, who is just a dear man, said, let's all come down to the front and get in a circle and pray. So we walked down to the front and we're standing in a circle. I remember, as clear as day, staring at the ceiling tiles, trying to find patterns just to make the time pass. And then in a single moment, Jesus graciously interrupted my regularly scheduled programming. I had an open, I don't even know what it was. I felt like I went someplace else. Nobody else in the room experienced it, but I did. And in a single moment, the pain of a childhood that I had had of seeing my parents divorce, of experiencing some very painful and some very difficult things that kids should not have to go through, all the questions that I had spent my early childhood trying to figure out who I was and why I felt different. It was like God showed them to me and he put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I heard his voice say, Lee, I've sovereignly chosen you to be a voice to your generation. That's why you feel different. Rise up and serve me with all of your heart. And that changed, that set the trajectory of my life. I was ruined for normal because I had heard the voice of God. I had experienced the presence of God, even in a small little church. Even in a church where I was 40 years younger than the next youngest person in the church. It didn't have anything to do with the surroundings. It had everything to do with the ladder of God's presence that was established in that place, that spoke to my heart and changed me and called me. And what it did was it wrecked me for normal Christianity. And I went through my teen years playing basketball and doing other things like that, but of being discipled by some very godly individuals, but having a deep, deep relationship with the Lord, birthed in prayer, where God became my father. And he called me to speak those same type of words and to call a generation to that kind of relationship. And it was out of that my wife and I moved to the city that we moved to plant a church that would be a praying and a worshiping church, because what I wanted to replicate space for people to encounter Jesus the way I had, because it had totally transformed my life. And the question that I've consistently come up to at every stage along the way of 26 years of leading a church from 50 people, first week was 70 people. The next week we had a Gideon's revival and grew from 70 to 50. And then, over the course of years, and every 5 or 6 years, it felt like there were these moments where we could choose to go standard operating procedure, or we could build around his presence and build a praying and a worshiping culture. And I will tell you that going from 50 to thousands and then multiple locations and all those type of things, at every single turn, we find ourselves back at this same intersection. And we're finding it right now where we can go back to status quo if you want to. But think about this. Think about this. During the life of David, there were 2 tabernacles. There was his tabernacle, where the ark and the presence was, and the tabernacle of Moses was still in full operation in Gibeon. It still had the priesthood. It still had the altar. It still had the laver. It still had the table of showbread. It still had the altar of incense. It still had the lampstands. It still had the veil. It still had the Holy of Holies. There just wasn't any presence in it. But every single day they woke up and they went through the same operations and the same movements, and they did the same things, and they did it without the presence. Where just about 7 miles away, David throws up a Coleman tent, and he puts the Ark of the Covenant at the center of it, and it's filled with the presence. It's surrounded by Levites. It's flourishing with the prophetic. People of other nations are traveling trade routes right next to it. And this is where David gets his Psalm 40. He says, God has put a new song in my heart, praise to my God. Many shall see it and hear it and put their trust in the Lord. I mean, there's a move of God happening in Jerusalem, and there's the old status quo structure that's happening just miles and miles away. How in the world would anybody choose to go to the empty structure when you could go to Jerusalem and you could find the presence? And in much the same way, we have a decision to make. We can either choose structure, the existing priesthood order, and the system without the presence of God, or we can choose the new wineskin. And we can embrace a new priesthood. And we can build around the presence of God. What do I mean by a new priesthood? Well, David was not an authorized priest. David was not authorized. But he said, hey, bring me one of those linen ephods. Well, those are for the priests. No, I want one of them. And how many know, when you're the king, you get what you want? It's like, bring me one of those ephods, those linen, Tommy Bahama linen ephods. And he put that ephod on, and what he did that day was he stepped into a role literally a couple thousand years, hundreds and 1,500 years before the time that we would have an understanding of the priesthood of all believers. David, because of his love for the Lord, was able to pull from the age to come back into history and open a portal for things that nobody else had ever even contended for or believed in their era. Think about that. It's like, no, I'm going to be a priest before God. And he was the one that was out in front of the ark. He was the one that was twirling and worshiping. And he was the one that had the ephod on. And it was because of that that his wife hated him so deeply and so resented him, because he wasn't acting like a king. He wasn't acting like a king. He was acting like a priest. And so when I talk about a change in the priesthood, I think God is raising up in this hour all across the land in obscure places and well-known places like this, where he's raising up a leadership culture, and he's raising up individuals that carry that heart that says, bring me the ephod. Bring me the ephod, because I'm not taking the ark back to the old ways. I'm not going back to the way things were, because I want the new thing. I want the new wine. I want the presence of God at the center. In June of 2020, I don't know if you guys remember 2020, but it was quite a year. In June of 2020, I will say often, not yearly or even every couple of years, but several times throughout my ministry, the Lord has given me dramatic dreams. And in 2020, June of 2020, I had a significant dream from the Lord. And I won't tell you all the dream, but I will tell you this, that in the midst of the dream, I knew I was dreaming. I knew that the Lord was speaking to me, and I knew that it was important. And so I immediately was remembering and word associating so I could write it down. And here's what the Lord said to me. The Lord said, 7 days of testing have been appointed for the American church. 7 days that will define it. These are the days of urgency. There will be praise and prayer, or there will be praise in the streets of America if there will finally be prayer in my church. In the 7 days, I really went back to the Lord. Is that 7 literal days? Is that 7 months? Is that 7 things? And I really sense that it's a period of time. It's an undefined but yet a perfect period of time. And I think we are dead in the middle of it, in an hour of urgency where God is testing us, where he is looking at the church. He's saying, look, I've allowed the pressure to come. I've allowed things to be shaken. How are you going to respond? It literally, I believe that we're experiencing some of the discipline of the Lord, the discipline that is gracious and merciful. See, because when God puts his hand on the nations in judgment, it's when God judges the nations, it's him putting pressure on. But when God brings judgment to the church, it's the fatherly touch. And I think that we're in the middle of a period of time of urgency where God's like, wake up, wake up, wake up. This is not business as usual. This is time for us to evaluate things. It's time for our hearts to be awakened, and it's time for us to recognize that we have been a prayerless people. That we have depended on systems. We have depended on structures. We have depended on business methods. We have depended on intellect. And we've got all the resources, and we've got greater opportunities than any other expression of the church anywhere in the globe. But yet we are the one expression of the church that has looked at prayer with disdain. And God's like, look, I'm allowing some pressure to come right now so that you will respond by turning your face back to me. If you'll do it, God says there's going to be praise in the streets. I'm believing for a mighty outpouring and a mighty revival in the midst of this generation that is unprecedented. I'm believing that what took place in the 60s and into the 70s and that great Jesus People movement revival, God's going to put on repeat and on steroids. But it's not going to come just because we want it. It's going to come because the church responds in prayer and in repentance. I believe God is raising up leaders like unto David who've been hidden in the wilderness, longing for the presence of God, putting on the ephod, leading the way to bring the ark, the presence of God, back to the center of the church, and building resting places across Western culture. 4 years ago, our church was we had at that time 2 locations, large locations, seat a lot of people, and they were packed, overflowing. And I've read just about every church growth book. I've been to the conferences, bought the T-shirt, the whole deal. And some of the national leaders that I trust, and consultants and people that just over the course of doing ministry you get to know, began to ask me the question, Lee, when are you going to build your next location? Because I mean, how many services can you do? At that time we were doing 3 at both, and they were full. And so they began to say, Grand Rapids or different cities, places that you need to go to. And it was in my heart to do that. But God took me back. Jane and I were on a prayer walk. We were on a prayer walk, and Kalamazoo is a university town. We have about 30,000 college students. It's a very secular, it's a very progressive city. We were doing a prayer walk on Western Michigan University's campus. And we came around the corner, and we saw a building that I had heard of. I knew the building that back in the 80s was a campus church that was run by a group called Maranatha Ministries. Many of you may be familiar with that, Bob Weiner, and it was one of their churches. Dear friends of ours helped start that. It had failed, and now it was an Islamic mosque. And I hadn't walked by this particular building, but it was a mosque, and so I went home and I Googled it, kind of looked it up, and discovered on the website it said House of Prayer. Because Muslims pray 5 times a day. And so this particular mosque emphasizes the 5 different prayer meetings that they have per week. And they had a whole schedule laid out of the different prayer meetings, who led them, the cantors, and the texts from the Quran that they read from. If you did not know that it was Islamic, you would have thought it was a house of prayer. And I don't know what it was, but it just made me mad. About a year earlier, Jane and I had moved from our comfort. We had a beautiful home kind of out in the country. And the Lord said, I want you to move to downtown Kalamazoo. So we bought a home in downtown. We're living right in the center of the city. We're walking on campus every day. I walk by this mosque that's a prayer house, look it up, and I see this, and I am provoked. And here's what jumped in my heart. It is not right that in this city there is a prayer house where prayer is ascending to a demon idol 5 times a day, but yet there is not continual prayer and worship before Jesus from the heart of this city. This is not right. And so Jane and I said, I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to buy a house or something, and we're just going to turn it into a prayer house, but this is going to happen. And it began to consume me. We've always had prayer meetings in our church. Always. We've even had a prayer room in 2 of our locations. But this was different. And so that night, God woke me up and reminded me, go back into an old journal. So I went back into an old journal from about 2005 where I had drawn a picture before I even knew that we would go multi-site, and it showed different locations all over our community. And at the center of it, downtown, was a 3-story building, and I said, a radiant prayer furnace. And God had given me a snapshot vision that I had forgotten about of a prayer room from the center of our city that would be a furnace, and fire was going out to all of our locations on the weekend. And it was from the center of our city, and it said, prayer and worship morning, noon, and night. And I said, this is it. And so I went to our elders and I said, guys, I know that we're right now, by all accounts, we're supposed to build another location, but I don't want to build another location. I want to build a resting place for the Lord. I said, I want us to build a prayer room in the heart of our city, right in downtown. And so we went on a journey trying to find a building. And we had money, we could not find a building, save our lives. And all the while we're like, are we doing the right thing? I'm not. This is it, this is it, this is it. And so then we ended up finding this business that was run by Christians right in the center. Downtown Kalamazoo has a walking mall right downtown. And so right on the mall, one of the historic buildings there had been sold out in parcels. On the second floor, there was a recording studio run by Christians, knew we were looking for a building, called us, said, do you want to buy our recording studio? We go down there, look at it, and it's like, this is great, but it's not a prayer room. And they said, well, we've got a storage room that goes with it and some offices. I said, well, show us that. Offices are offices, and then where's the storage room? And he says, oh, it's over here. He opens the door. It's a 5,000 square foot storage room that is unfinished, and it's just packed out with boxes. And I stood in it, and I went, this is it. And so we bought it for pennies on the dollar, no realtors involved. And then within a couple months, COVID hit. And while everyone was trying to figure out how to survive COVID, somehow God miraculously started bringing all the other tenants of the building to us and said, do you want to buy us out? 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 They just wanted to get out of Dodge. And we went from buying, just a small little parcel to, by the end of 2021, a 3-story, just like the drawing, 30,000 square foot ministry base in the heart of our city that is centered around what we built out as a prayer room. And so now from the heart of our city, we have School of Worship, School of Ministry. It becomes the incubator that we're training next generational leaders, church planners, worship leaders, missionaries, where they're learning the presence of God. We have prayer meetings. I think we have like 20 hours of prayer meetings that are going on morning, noon, and night throughout the entire week. And it's happening from the heart of our city. And here's what I will tell you is that I've been in that city for 26 years, and I've never experienced so much resistance as when we bought a little 4,000 square foot room and said, this is where we're going to pray. Mike Bickle walked into it. He landed on the day we closed on it. He called me out of the blue. He said, Lee, I want to come to Kalamazoo. And I said, come. So he landed, and it just happened to be the day we closed on the room. I walked him into the middle of it, and he goes, oh, this is going to be awesome. And they are all going to hate you so much for doing this. I had no idea what he was talking about. But now I do. But it's a beautiful thing. Every day that we wake up and we get articles written about us, and we get spray painted, vandalized across the front of our building, and we have protesters who come, literally just because of a prayer room. They think they're actually intimidating me. They're actually encouraging me because I'm like, we're doing the right thing again. The day they stop doing that is the day I need to buy another prayer room. Couple more things I want to share with you. Am I doing okay, Billy, time-wise? This message came out of a time of prayer and fasting last year. We were about to go into our national leadership conference that we do in May called a Rise Shine Conference. And I was up north in northern Michigan praying and fasting for a couple days. And the Lord gave me a vision of North America. And I had the content for this, and I was praying through it. The Lord just kind of gave me this snapshot of the North American continent. He said, this is America. This is the nation that you're contending for revival in. And then immediately, out of just random places across the United States, I began to see these polls shoot up all across in different places: Kalamazoo, Kansas City, Atlanta, North Dakota, California, just these polls rising up out of the continent. And I asked the Lord, what are these polls? And then he showed me what was going on the polls. He said, I am erecting in obscurity polls, churches and ministries that will be polls that right now does not make sense, but in the coming days are going to be poles that hold up the canopy of the tabernacle of David over North America. And he showed me North America covered by a tabernacle, and he said, this is the intention of my heart. And I believe with all of my heart that we're at that intersection. And we can choose to be leaders of the old order, or we can choose to be leaders of the new order, the order of David. And the reason for that is the priesthood is changing. What God is looking for in leaders is changing. He's looking for, number one, he's looking for leaders who will demonstrate and not delegate the ministry of prayer. He's looking for Davidic leaders who will demonstrate what it is to live a lifestyle of prayer and to actually lead prayer meetings. Do not, leaders, if you're in this room, what God is looking for is he's looking for prayer in the church, but we can't delegate it. We got to lead it. You need to lead it. Billy leads prayer meetings. I lead prayer meetings. The greatest thing that I do in my life is lead prayer meetings. I just had a bunch of pastors up at our context, and they said, what's your favorite room? And I said, well, my favorite room is this room, and it's the prayer room. If I had to lose everything and just hold on to one room, this is the room I would hold on to. I moved my office from my old campus to be right next to the prayer room because I want God next to me. And I know God's everywhere. I know we're carriers of the grace of God, but there's something about setting my heart in proximity to the space that I've set apart to seek him and to seek him corporately. So God is looking for leaders who will demonstrate and not just delegate the ministry of prayer. Number two, he's looking for churches and leaders that will not handle the presence, but host the presence. Can I tell you something about God? He will not be handled. Ask Uzzah. He will not be handled. When we handle something, we're trying to control it. But when we host it, we welcome and we surrender to him. The presence of God that we often talk about, we have to remember it's not an ethereal power. This is not Star Wars. This is not the Force. This is a person. This is a resurrected man. This is the glory of God. This is the abiding, tangible, making himself known, taking on an earthly geographical address, bringing his glory to bear to some measure so that we can encounter him. And woe to us if we begin to see his presence as useful for our ends. It's like when Jesus says in the book of Revelation, I am he who walks among the lampstands. Leaders, we need to recognize on Sunday morning, Jesus is walking up and down the aisles of our church. And we need to host him. And he's looking for churches and leaders that will do that and not try to handle him and fit him into our pre-curated purposes and plans. Number three, he's looking for leaders who will bring prayer from the back room to the center stage. From the back room to the center stage. I was at a church planting organizations conference several years ago, and I sat in on a boot camp where they're training new church planters. And I was never so grieved as the person leading the breakout began to answer questions, and he answered a question about prayer and ministering to people in the front. And the answer was, people can't handle prayer. They don't understand that. So don't pray in services. Don't pray at the end of worship songs. And don't do ministry at the front of the church. Sunday is the showroom floor. We do that in the back room. We change oil in the back room. And I thought, is that what this has come to? Is that what this has come to? He's looking for us to bring it back center stage. He's looking for us to pray together. The corporate altar, we've got to rebuild the corporate altar in America. It's great that we have private prayer lives, but your private prayer life is not going to shake the foundations of cities. It's in Acts 4, and when they had prayed, that is actually going to shift atmospheres in cities. Number 4, he's looking for leaders who will move from seeker to seek him in their orientation. See, we're not the only seekers. God's a seeker. He's seeking those who will worship him in spirit and in truth. And when I talk about going from a consumer mentality to a consume mentality, the first question out of our heart is not what do I want out of church, but it needs to be what does he want out of church. If he gets what he wants, we get what we want. And then he's looking, number 5, for a church that shifts from a celebrity culture to a surrendered culture. Can't have celebrities in the body of Christ anymore. We've got to become surrendered. Number 6, he's looking for people that will reject the political spirit in order to embrace a prophetic mandate. Hey everybody, 2024 is coming. And Arthur Wallace, the great revivalist, once said this: You cannot be a prophet to your culture if you are a product of your culture. And if we are allowing our heart to become marinated in the negative news, in the negative spirit of both sides of it, the leaven of Herod, then we cannot operate in the Spirit of God. We have to protect our hearts, and we have to protect our church, and we have to protect our prophetic mandate in this hour. That doesn't mean that we don't encourage people to engage. I believe that we need people to engage, but we have to engage in a way that we are not getting drawn in and sucked in and tethered to the things that man establishes as their platforms. It's kind of like Joshua sees the angel of the Lord. He's like, are you for us or are you against us? He says, yep, but I'm the captain of the host of the army of Israel. I'm God. I'm on God's side. And this is the mandate that we have to take. We need to be able to speak prophetically to both sides of the aisle by pointing them upward to the Lamb that's on the throne. We've got to have our eyes filled with that vision. Number 7, God's looking for a generation of leaders who will be consumed with a vow and not the approval of man. And the vow is Psalm 132. I will give my eyes no rest. I will not crawl into my bed. I will not give myself any comfort until I find a resting place for the Lord. That's the vow. It's the vow in our churches. I will not seek comfort. I will not go the easy way. I will not look for the easy fix, the quick way to grow. I'm not looking for that. I'm going to help nurture and develop and disciple my people towards Jesus, towards loving His Word, towards loving His presence, towards being spiritually formed and transformed in His presence. And I want God to find a resting place. If we're living for the approval of man, this is listen, I can guarantee you this. If there's a twinge of need on the inside of you as a leader for the approval of the world around you, you will quickly deconstruct. You will quickly fall apart. If you're waiting for somebody to go, oh, you Christians and your church is doing such good work. Listen, we are one of the largest philanthropic givers in our city, and we literally have organizations who won't take money from us. It's like, we don't want your money because you're Christians. It may not be like that in your context, but we are, my county voted, and they said Bernie Sanders is too conservative. So, 60% of our population said we have no religious affiliation. So we are in a mission field. But in the midst of that, we're not looking for people's approval. We want to love people well. We want to be gracious. We know who's saved and we know who's lost. And we love pulling lost people in. And we love the fact that they can't figure out why there's thousands of people worshiping and praying in their city when they've done such a good job of establishing the parameters of the kingdom of darkness in their city to block that out. I love the fact that people in our city can't figure it out because it's a sign and it's a wonder. But in the midst of that, we're not looking for their approval. Paul writes in Galatians chapter 1, for am I now seeking the approval of man or of God, or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. We've got to choose between the two. We've got to choose between revival and refusal. I end with this statement. God comes where He's wanted most. And He comes where what He wants most matters most. God comes where He's wanted most. How bad do we want Him? How bad do we want Him? He will come if we want Him. He will come in power. He will come in strength. He will come in holiness. He will come in conviction. He will come in tenderness. He will come consistently. He will come in healing. We're not trying to conjure something up in our churches. He just is simply saying, if I can find a people in every city who will welcome me, who will seek me with all their heart, will make that their agenda, I will raise up a tent pole in that city. And we will see a move of God. But make no mistake about it, the priesthood is changing. Consumer Christianity is over. God's just looking for leaders. And here's the beautiful thing that I believe about gatherings like this. And Billy, I just so love and respect your heart. And It was an honor for me to even just jump down here to be a part of what you're doing and rallying all of us from so many different places together. I really believe with all of my heart that God is, in settings like this, there are catalysts, there are catalytic people that, just like David, nobody knows about. Just like a 12-year-old kid in a Good Shepherd Assembly of God in Clarkston, Michigan, that nobody knew about, but God spoke to them. What you get over the next couple of days here, what you got last night, can become a catalytic moment to go home and say, literally, it's very simple. Gather your people together, gather your leaders together, gather your family together, and just say, God, we want you. We want you. Not just what you do, we want you. Not just what you have to offer, but we want you. And we will say 1,000 no's to good things so that we can give one yes to your presence in our midst. Would you guys stand up with me all over this place?